That is the biggest political, philosophical, social, economic problem that the Delta faces. One problem is that there is no single voice in the Delta. The Delta is not one thing. It's not just this monolithic black box. It's a lot of different communities with different needs and different requirements. There's conflict within the Delta about how the Delta should be operated. Obviously, we've got a large part of the state's population and its agriculture in the coastal areas, Central California, San Francisco, the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, as well as all of Southern California, dependent upon an estuary that functions for ecological purposes, but also provides a water supply to a large part of the state. So the question is, how do we meet what are called the co-equal goals of restoring the ecological function of the Delta, and yet also, and at the same time, creating more reliability of the water supply, and then doing it in a way that respects the Delta as an evolving place. But the Delta has always been an evolving place. We've made very significant engineering changes to the Delta. And the notion that we could just stop and have the Delta stay the way it is goes back to the point that it is not sustainable. So what do we do? Well, we've got to improve both the environment, possibly through some restoration, some reconciliation, doing as much as we can to make it hospitable to its native species. And I think of the key one there as being salmon, which have to migrate out from their natal streams through the Delta and then come back to spawn several years later after their trip to the ocean. Getting in and out of the Delta for those fish has got to be made easier, more hospitable, less dangerous than it is today. And we've got to do something to make the water supply more reliable. The Delta Plan, which has been is in the process of being updated by the Delta Stewardship Council, proposes dual conveyance. That is, using the Delta as a conveyance much the way it is today, but supplementing that with a second way of conveying water across the Delta. That's the challenge of our generation. So the notion of dual conveyance, which is now in the Delta Plan, is that for too long we've essentially misused the Delta as a conveyance facility. That is, in the concept for the State Water Project, it was always anticipated that as that project built out and as new supplies were added to the project and new demand came onto the project, that there would be a way of moving water from the northern part of the state to the southern part of the state without disturbing or destroying or hurting the Delta. What will happen to the Delta if we don't take any action? It will continue to deteriorate in lots of different ways. We're going to see lower dissolved oxygen because there are more weeds taking that oxygen. We're going to find occlusion of the Delta channels because sedimentation can't be managed with a ongoing process of dredging and restructuring some of these Delta levees. We're at risk of an earthquake. No one knows, it's kind of a black swan event. It's foreseeable, but not predictable, meaning that you can imagine an earthquake that would damage infrastructure in the Delta, but you can't predict when it'll be, so it's one of those things that kind of gets deferred in terms of addressing it. But in addition to the levees in the Delta, we've got several state highways that cross the Delta. We've got Interstate 5 that is actually the western edge of the Delta. We've got gas pipelines. We've got electric distribution lines, all of which are within the Delta and are subject to risks of earthquake, sea level rise, large flood events, long droughts, etc. So all of that is at stake here if we don't improve our management of the Delta.